Buckle up, folks, history buffs and casual listeners alike. Today we're strapping in for a deep dive into a period that's anything but boring, though you might have heard it called that.
The so-called Dark Ages, right?
Exactly. It's that era sandwiched between the Roman Empire and the Renaissance that sometimes gets painted as, well, a little dull.
Yeah, a bit of a historical black hole.
But trust us, there's nothing further from the truth. We're talking about the centuries after the fall of Rome.
And let me tell you, things get pretty wild. We've got migrations, invasions, empires rising and falling, the church flexing its muscles, and all sorts of fascinating characters you wouldn't believe.
Like a historical Game of Thrones, but with real-life consequences that shapes the world we live in today. So let's set the stage. It's the 5th century CE.
The Roman Empire is crumbling, and things are about to get very interesting.
Imagine you're in Europe at this time. The Roman order you've known for centuries is collapsing, and new powers are emerging, like those nomadic Huns sweeping in from the east.
Led by the infamous Attila, whose name alone struck fear into the hearts of many.
Attila the Hun. Not exactly someone you want to bump into on a bad day. But wasn't their impact more about triggering migrations than outright conquest?
You hit the nail on the head. They were like this catalyst, putting pressure on existing populations and setting off a chain reaction of movements.
Like dominoes falling across Europe.
Exactly. And among those on the move were the Germanic peoples. Already settled along Rome's borders, they were pushed further westward as the Huns advanced.
So we've got mass migrations, empires crumbling, and a whole lot of uncertainty. Sounds like a recipe for chaos. What happens next?
Well, out of this chaos, new kingdoms begin to emerge. The Visigoths, for instance, settle in the Iberian Peninsula in 415 CE.
That's where Spain and Portugal are today.
You got it. And then you have the Ostrogoths in 493 CE, led by Theodoric the Great, setting up shop in Italy.
So these barbarians, as the Romans call them, are carving out kingdoms and shaping the future of Europe. What a power shift.
Absolutely. But hold on, Italy wasn't done yet.
Oh, right. It was like musical chairs with all these groups vying for control.
Exactly. After the Ostrogoths came the Lombards, who also established a kingdom in Italy, but later, in the 6th century. It just shows how fluid the political scene was.
And let's not forget the Vandals. They went all the way to North Africa, establishing their kingdom there in 429 CE. That's some serious migrating.
No kidding. And it really demonstrates how far-reaching these migrations were, reshaping the map not just of Europe, but regions across the Mediterranean.
We've got Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Lombards, Vandals. It's tough to keep track. But one group that really stands out in this era is the Franks.
Ah, the Franks. They become a major force in Western Europe, and it all starts with their first king, Clovis. He not only founded the Merovingian dynasty, but made a strategic decision with huge implications.
He converted to Catholicism, right?
Exactly. But not just any Catholicism. He specifically aligned with the Athanasian Creed.
Ah, so this is where things get interesting. Choosing a specific creed wasn't just about faith, was it?
Not at all. It was a power move, aligning himself with a particular theological faction within the church, creating alliances and rivalries.
So religion wasn't just personal belief, it was a major factor in political strategy. Kind of like how kings or politicians today might align themselves with particular religious leaders.
Precisely. And that dynamic between religion and politics is something we see throughout history. Sometimes they're in sync, sometimes they clash.
And speaking of clashing, we can't forget Charles Martel, another Frankish leader who really made his mark on history.
Ah, Charles Martel, the Hammer. He earned that nickname at the Battle of Tours in 732 CE. Picture this: Frankish forces against the advancing Islamic army of the Umayyad Caliphate.
A real clash of civilizations.
Absolutely. And the outcome of this battle was decisive. Martel's victory halted the Islamic advance further into Europe, preserving those nascent Christian kingdoms.
It's amazing to think how one battle could have such a massive impact on history.
Right. The religious and political map of Europe could have looked very different, and Charles Martel's legacy doesn't end there. His son, Pepin the Short, founded the Carolingian dynasty.
Pepin the Short. Don't let the name fool you. He made some significant moves, solidifying the alliance between the Franks and the papacy.
You're talking about the donation of Pepin, right? He granted lands in Italy to the Pope, basically laying the foundation for the Papal States.
So Pepin strengthens ties with the church, sets the stage for the Papal States. It's like he's laying the groundwork for someone pretty important.
You could say that. Enter Pepin's son, Charlemagne, arguably one of the most influential figures in European history.
Charlemagne. The name alone conjures up images of power, conquest, a vast empire.
He was a force to be reckoned with, expanded Frankish territories, battled Avars and Muslims, revived learning and culture.
A real Renaissance man, centuries before the Renaissance.
Yeah.
But his biggest achievement has to be that coronation in 800 CE, right?
Oh, absolutely. Crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in Rome itself, merging the power of the church with the might of the Frankish kingdom, a symbolic moment reviving the legacy of Rome.
So now we have a powerful empire, a strong alliance between church and state. Things are finally settling down a bit.
Well, if history teaches us anything, it's that things never stay settled for long. Even Charlemagne's vast empire eventually faced the pressures of division.
The classic story, powerful empire, internal strife.
And Charlemagne's empire was no exception. After his death, his grandsons divided the empire with the Treaty of Verdun in 843 CE.
And this is basically the starting point for what will become France and Germany.
Exactly. The seeds of modern nation-states are sown right there, but that doesn't mean Charlemagne's legacy vanished.
Right, because his influence echoes in the East.
Exactly. In 962 CE, we see the rise of the Holy Roman Empire under Otto Athirst, drawing on Charlemagne's imperial title and that idea of a Christian empire.
So while the East is figuring things out, what about the West?
Well, out of the post-Carolingian chaos, a new dynasty emerges. In 987 CE, Hugh Capet establishes the Capetian dynasty in West Francia.
The region we know is France today. So many changes, so many power shifts, it's hard to keep up. But there's another group we haven't talked about yet, known for their seafaring skills and, well, those horned helmets.
You're talking about the Vikings.
The Vikings. Those Norse seafarers weren't just content to stay in Scandinavia. They explored, traded, and, raided across Europe and beyond.
They were a force to be reckoned with. Their impact on European history is undeniable, from place names to genetic lineages.
Their legacy goes beyond violence and plunder, though.
Absolutely. Remember Rollo? He struck a deal with the Frankish king and established the Duchy of Normandy in 911 CE.
Seems like a minor event, but...
But it had huge consequences. Rollo's settlement paved the way for the Norman conquest of England in 1066 CE, led by William the Conqueror, a descendant of Rollo himself.
William the Conqueror. Talk about a game changer. He brought Norman culture, language, and political systems to England, transforming the island nation. It's incredible how these seemingly isolated events were all connected.
It's like a giant historical tapestry, each thread woven into the next.
Okay, so we've covered the fall of Rome, the rise of these new kingdoms, the spread of Christianity.
And let's not forget the Vikings making their dramatic entrance.
But amidst all this change, a new social and political order was taking shape, one that would define medieval Europe, feudalism.
Feudalism. It emerged from this blend of Roman and Germanic traditions, creating this web of relationships based on land, loyalty, and military service.
Feudalism, the system that makes everyone's eyes glaze over in history class. Can you break it down for us?
At its heart was the manor system. Think self-sufficient estates where lords granted land to vassals in exchange for their loyalty and military service, and those vassals could then grant land to their own vassals, creating this layered structure.
Sounds a bit like a pyramid scheme, but instead of money, it's land and loyalty.
Well, not quite a pyramid scheme, but it definitely relied on hierarchy. At the top, you had the king, then powerful nobles, followed by knights, and at the bottom, the peasants who worked the land.
Each level depending on the one above it for protection, and in return, they owed service and loyalty. Sounds pretty rigid. Was there any social mobility?
Feudalism, despite the hierarchy, had some flexibility. While there were social structures, there were also opportunities for advancement.
So, a peasant could climb the ladder.
It wasn't impossible. A skilled peasant could rise through military ranks, a clever merchant could amass wealth and gain influence, and even peasant revolts, though often crushed, could force concessions. Feudalism was dynamic, always adapting.
It's like a medieval game of chess, with each player trying to outmaneuver the other for control.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of power players, we can't forget another major force in this era, the church.
Ah, yes, the church. In a world of shifting alliances and warring kingdoms, they offered stability and spiritual guidance.
The church was a powerhouse. It had its own laws, courts, and even taxes. Controlled vast amounts of land and wealth, and its influence stretched into every aspect of life, from birth to death.
Wow, it was like a government within a government.
Absolutely. And that sometimes led to some serious tension with secular rulers. Remember the investiture controversy?
That was a showdown between the church and the Holy Roman Empire over who could appoint bishops.
Right. Exactly. It all came to a head in 1077. Emperor Henry IV, the most powerful ruler in Europe, was forced to humble himself before Pope Gregory VII at Canossa.
Imagine the scene, the emperor kneeling in the snow, begging for forgiveness.
A powerful image, isn't it? It really highlights how powerful the church had become. And papal power reached its peak under Pope Innocent III in the 13th century. He even excommunicated King John of England.
So the church wasn't just preaching, they were actively shaping politics.
Religion and politics intertwined as always.
We've explored the West, the rise and fall of empires, the church flexing its muscles. But what about the East?
The East. That's where we find the Byzantine Empire, a world that's often overshadowed by its Western counterpart.
The Byzantine Empire, the other Roman Empire. But was it just a carbon copy of Rome or something unique?
It's a question historians still debate. While they drew on Roman traditions, they also developed their own distinct identity.
Rome 2.0, but with a Byzantine twist.
Exactly. They blended Roman, Greek, and Eastern influences, creating a unique mix.
Sounds fascinating. What set them apart?
Well, for one, they embraced Eastern Orthodox Christianity. It became the state religion permeating every aspect of Byzantine life.
So a different kind of Christianity.
They had a more centralized government, with the emperor wielding more power, and their capital, Constantinople, was a major hub of trade between East and West.
So a different kind of Christianity, a more powerful emperor, and a bustling trade center. A very different world from those feudal kingdoms in the West.
Absolutely. And they played a vital role in defending Europe from various threats for over 1,000 years.
Wow, 1,000 years. An impressive run. But even empires with a 1,000-year legacy eventually meet their end.
Sadly, yes. In 1453, Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, fell to the Ottoman Turks, a seismic event that marked the end of an era.
The fall of Constantinople, one of those dates that sticks with you from history class. It signifies so much more than just the end of an empire.
Absolutely. It was a symbolic power shift, reshaping the map of Europe and the Mediterranean, and it was the final curtain call for that enduring legacy of Rome in the East.
A bit bittersweet, seeing how even the most enduring empires eventually crumble. But while one power fades in the East, another is on the rise in the North, right?
You got it. The story of Russia is just beginning.
Wow. We've covered so much ground already. The fall of Rome, the rise of these new powers, the spread of Christianity, the Vikings, feudalism, the Byzantine Empire, and now the emergence of Russia. It's incredible to think how all these threads are interwoven.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore, so many more fascinating characters and events that shape the course of history.
Well, I'm ready to dive deeper. Let's continue this journey through early medieval Europe and see where it takes us next.
You know, it's easy to think of history in these neat little boxes, like the Roman Empire, then the Middle Ages, then the Renaissance.
Right, like separate chapters in a book.
But this era, it really throws those neat divisions out the window. It's all jumbled up, interconnected. It shows how the past doesn't just disappear, it morphs into something new.
It's like a historical remix. Roman legacies, Germanic traditions, the church holding it all together, and then those Vikings coming in and shaking things up.
Exactly. A constant blend of influences, a real melting pot. Makes you wonder, what would Europe look like today if even one little thing had been different?
Ooh, okay, hold on. Too many alternate histories. But speaking of the Vikings, we often picture them as these, brutal raiders with horned helmets pillaging their way across Europe. But they were more than just that, right?
Oh, way more. Yeah, they were fierce warriors, no doubt. But they were also skilled sailors, traders, and explorers. They had settlements everywhere, from North America to the Caspian Sea.
Wow, that's a pretty big footprint. So those Viking helmets we see at football games, there's a whole lot more to the story than just aggression.
Absolutely. They were masters of adaptation, raiding, trading, settling. They found ways to thrive in all sorts of environments and cultures.
Now, back to feudalism for a second. It's often presented as this very rigid system. Everyone knew their place, and that was that. But was it really that simple?
Feudalism was complex, evolved over centuries. It was definitely more messy than the textbooks make it seem. Sure, you had your kings, nobles, knights, and peasants, each with their roles and obligations.
Right, the classic pyramid structure.
But even within that structure, there was some wiggle room.
So a peasant could actually move up the social ladder.
It happened. A skilled peasant could rise through the military. A smart merchant could become wealthy and influential. Even those peasant revolts, though often crushed, could force the elites to make some changes. Feudalism was dynamic, always responding to the pressures around it.
So it was a bit more fluid than we might think.
Yeah, not completely static. Now, one thing that's clear is the growing power of the church in this period.
Right. In a world that often felt chaotic and dangerous, the church offered stability and a sense of continuity.
Exactly. It was a source of spiritual guidance, of course, but also education, social services. It really provided a bedrock for society.
So it wasn't just about saving souls, it was about meeting practical needs as well.
Absolutely. And they also claimed to be the link between God and humanity. That gave them huge authority, both spiritual and political. The church had its own laws, its own courts. It even collected taxes.
Wow, like a parallel government. But didn't that kind of power sometimes lead to, well, problems?
Of course, like any human institution, the church was far from perfect. There were periods of corruption, abuses of power, internal struggles, and even religious persecution.
So it's a reminder that power, whether it's in the hands of a king or a pope, can be a double-edged sword.
Exactly. Even institutions that claim to represent the highest ideals can be flawed because they're run by humans.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the Byzantine Empire. You mentioned earlier that it was this vibrant, complex world that often gets overshadowed. What made it unique?
Well, it wasn't just a Roman rehash, it was a fusion of influences. Roman, Greek, and Eastern, creating something totally new.
So it was like a remix of cultures. How did this play out?
Well, for one, they fully embraced Eastern Orthodox Christianity. It became the state religion, influencing everything from their art and architecture to politics and social norms.
Okay, so a different flavor of Christianity than in the West. What else?
They also had a more centralized government with a powerful emperor, and their capital, Constantinople, was this incredible hub of trade connecting East and West, a truly cosmopolitan city.
Wow, so a different religion, a stronger emperor, and a bustling trade center. That does sound pretty different from what was happening in Western Europe.
Oh, completely. They preserved ancient Greek knowledge, created stunning art and architecture, and really played a crucial role in defending Europe from outside threats for centuries.
1,000 years, in fact. But you mentioned earlier that even the Byzantines eventually met their end.
It's true. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks, a pivotal moment that reshaped the balance of power in the region.
And it marked the end of that Roman legacy that had endured in the East for so long.
Absolutely. The fall of Constantinople, it wasn't just a military defeat, it was the end of an era.
It's like watching a historical drama unfold. But while one curtain closes in the East, another is rising in the North, right?
Right. While the Byzantines faced their downfall, a new power was emerging in the vast lands of Eastern Europe, Russia. And its story is filled with all the elements we've been talking about: migration, conquest, cultural exchange.
It's amazing how all these stories intertwine. You mentioned the Vikings earlier. Turns out they had a hand in the birth of Russia as well.
You're talking about those Scandinavian traders and warriors, the Russes, right?
Exactly. They ventured eastward, established settlements mixed with Slavic populations, and laid the foundation for the first Russian state, the Kievan Rus.
It really shows how far their influence reached.
From raiding coasts to founding nations. But what really set the Kievan Rus on a unique path was their conversion to Christianity, wasn't it?
You're right. Vladimir I's decision to embrace Eastern Orthodox Christianity in 988 was a pivotal moment. It shaped their religious landscape, influenced their culture, and forged a strong connection with the Byzantine world.
So it wasn't just a spiritual choice, it was a strategic one, forging alliances and adopting new traditions.
Religion and politics always intertwined.
So we've got the Kievan Rus as this powerful new state with strong ties to the Byzantines. What happens next?
Well, like any rising power, they faced challenges, internal divisions, conflicts with neighbors, the constant threat of invasion. And then in the 13th century, a new player arrived on the scene that would change everything: the Mongols.
The Mongols, led by Batu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan himself. Their arrival in Eastern Europe must have been terrifying.
It was a game changer. The Mongols, with their superior military tactics, swept through the Kievan Rus. They conquered cities, devastated the countryside, and imposed their rule.
And this is the period known as the Tatar yoke.
Exactly. Yeah. It lasted for over 2 centuries. Imagine living under that kind of foreign domination for generations.
It must have been incredibly difficult. How did the Russian people cope?
The Russian princes had to submit to Mongol authority. They paid tribute, provided military support, but within their own territories, they managed to hold on to some autonomy. And over time, a new center of power emerged: Moscow.
So, out of the ashes of the Kievan Rus, Moscow starts to rise. What made it so special?
Moscow had several things going for it. Its location was strategically important for trade and defense. The Moscow princes were politically astute, and they had the backing of the Russian Orthodox Church, which had moved its seat to Moscow in the 14th century.
So smart location, clever leaders, and the support of the church.
A winning combination. But the road to independence was long and hard. A key turning point came in 1480 when Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great, refused to pay further tribute to the Golden Horde.
Ivan the Great, standing up to the Mongols. What happened next?
This act of defiance led to a standoff between the Russian and Mongol armies, the Great Stand on the Ugar River.
Two armies facing off. The fate of Russia hanging in the balance. It sounds like a scene from a movie.
It was a tense moment. But in the end, the Mongols, facing internal problems and logistical challenges, they withdrew without a fight. This event marked the end of Mongol domination and the beginning of a new era for Russia.
What a victory. Ivan the Great, defying the Mongols, setting the stage for a powerful, independent Russia.
And he didn't stop there. Ivan III claimed the title of Tsar, declaring himself heir to the Byzantine emperors, and began expanding Russia's territory and influence. His reign was a turning point, a moment when Russia truly arrived on the world stage.
It's a remarkable story of resilience. From the arrival of the Russians to the Mongol conquest and the rise of Moscow, the Russian people faced incredible challenges, but ultimately forged their own destiny.
It shows that history isn't always a straight line. It's full of unexpected turns, challenges, and triumphs.
Now, while Russia's story is captivating, it's important to remember that the Slavic world extended beyond those borders.
Exactly. The Slavic world was incredibly diverse, with different cultures, languages, and political entities. Think about the Serbs and Bulgarians in the Balkans, who embraced Orthodox Christianity and carved out their own kingdoms amidst the Byzantine and Ottoman empires.
Right. And then you have the Poles and Lithuanians, who united to form a powerful force in Eastern Europe.
Challenging the Teutonic Knights and shaping the political map of the region, it's a reminder that Europe, even back then, was a dynamic and interconnected place.
A melting pot of cultures and influences. But before we move on, let's talk about one more group that added to that mix, the Magyars.
Ah, yes. The Magyars, those nomadic warriors from Central Asia, they really shook things up when they arrived in Europe in the 9th century.
They conquered the Carpathian Basin and established the Kingdom of Hungary, right?
Exactly. Their arrival had a huge impact on Central Europe, both politically and culturally.
So they were kind of like the Huns, but instead of just passing through, they settled down and built a kingdom.
They were skilled horsemen and fierce warriors, which helped them conquer a vast territory. But they were also adaptable. They gradually assimilated into European society and even embraced Christianity.
So they knew how to play the game. Tough when they needed to be, but also willing to adapt to succeed.
Precisely. Their conversion to Roman Catholicism in the 10th century solidified their place in European politics and culture. The Kingdom of Hungary became a key player in the region, influencing the balance of power between the Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantines, and the Ottomans.
It's amazing how these nomadic warriors integrated into the European power structure and became such a significant force. It really shows how dynamic and fluid the medieval world could be.
Absolutely. A world where the map was constantly changing, new powers were emerging, and the lines between different groups were always shifting.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. From the fall of Rome to the rise of new empires, the spread of Christianity, the Vikings, feudalism, the Byzantine Empire, the emergence of Russia, and now the Magyars.
It's been quite a journey, a whirlwind tour of early medieval Europe, filled with fascinating characters and pivotal events.
And it's important to remember that this is just a glimpse into a truly vast and complex period.
There's always more to explore.
Absolutely. And while we're often drawn to the big events, the battles and empires, it's important to remember that history is ultimately about people, their lives, their struggles, their triumphs, their contributions to the world we live in today.
Well said. It's through those personal stories that we can truly appreciate the richness and complexity of the past.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what stands out to you as the most significant turning point in this whole era?
Oh, that's a tough one. There are so many to choose from. But I'd have to say the fall of the Roman Empire. It wasn't just the collapse of a political entity, it was the end of an era.
It's true. The Roman Empire had been so dominant for so long. When it fell, it created this huge vacuum that allowed for all sorts of new possibilities to emerge. New kingdoms, new religions, new social structures.
Exactly. It was a paradigm shift that reverberated throughout Europe and beyond. And it wasn't just about political power, it was about culture, language, identity. The Roman world fragmented into smaller, more localized entities, each with its own distinct characteristics.
It's incredible to think how much of what we consider European today has its roots in this period. Our languages, our religions, our legal systems, the idea of nation-states.
It's all connected to those events that unfolded in early medieval Europe. And it wasn't always a smooth or peaceful process, of course. There was plenty of chaos and violence, but also great creativity, innovation, and cultural exchange. It was a period of both destruction and construction.
I love that destruction and construction. It really captures the essence of this era. What if you could go back in time and witness one event from this period? What would you choose?
That's a tough one. But I think I'd go with Charlemagne's coronation in 800 CE. Can you imagine the scene? The grandeur of Rome, the weight of history, the blending of Roman, Christian, and Frankish traditions.
To be there in that moment, to see Charlemagne crowned as the new emperor of the Romans.
It was a pivotal moment, not just symbolically, but politically. It cemented the alliance between the Franks and the papacy, setting the stage for the Carolingian Renaissance and influencing European politics and religion for centuries.
It's fascinating how one event can have such a ripple effect across time. It really brings history to life.
And that's why studying history is so important. It's not just about memorizing dates and names, it's about understanding the forces that have shaped our world.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm left with a sense of awe at the sheer scale and complexity of early medieval Europe. It's a period that often gets overlooked, but it was a time of incredible transformation, innovation, and resilience.
I think it's a period that offers valuable lessons for us today. We live in a world that's increasingly interconnected, facing challenges that often seem insurmountable. But by looking back at how previous generations navigated periods of upheaval, we can gain insights and hope that even in the darkest of times, humanity can find a way forward.
What a great point. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of early medieval Europe. We hope you've enjoyed the journey so far.
The pleasure was all ours. And remember, the exploration doesn't have to end here.
Keep diving deeper, keep asking questions, and keep making those connections between the past, present, and future.
We'll see you next time.
You know, we've covered so much ground already, from the ruins of Rome to the rise of new powers like the Franks and those seafaring Vikings. And let's not forget that budding Russian state we were just talking about. Empires clashing, the church emerging as this major force. But it strikes me that early medieval Europe wasn't just about chaos and collapse.
You're right. It wasn't just chaos. It was also about new beginnings.
Exactly. It's like, imagine a forest after a fire. It might look devastated at first, but new life is already starting to sprout.
I like that analogy. The fall of Rome, it was like clearing the ground for new ideas to take root, new cultures to blossom.
And new ways of organizing society, even if they weren't always perfect, like feudalism, which we talked about earlier. It seemed like they were making things up as they went along.
Figuring it out on the fly. And the church played a huge role in all of this, not just as a spiritual guide, but as a real power player. Monasteries were centers of learning, bishops had political clout, and the Pope, well, he could even challenge kings and emperors.
It's wild to think about. In a world that was often so unpredictable and, frankly, dangerous, the church provided a sense of stability.
It was both a source of comfort and a framework for making sense of the world.
And that framework sometimes led them into some pretty intense conflicts, like the investiture controversy, the church going head-to-head with the Holy Roman Empire over who had the power to appoint bishops.
Can you imagine the audacity? A pope telling an emperor what to do. But that's how much influence the church had gained.
It really was a power struggle for the ages, and it shows just how high the stakes were. We're not just talking about abstract ideas here, but real power, wealth, and control.
Absolutely. The outcome of those conflicts shaped the political and religious map of Europe for centuries. But, you know, even with all the upheaval and power struggles, this era wasn't just about darkness and decline. There were glimmers of hope, signs of progress and creativity.
That's a good point. It's easy to get bogged down in the doom and gloom.
But we have to remember, this is the period when the foundations of modern Europe were being laid. New kingdoms emerging, new technologies developing, new ideas taking shape.
It's like they say, necessity is the mother of invention. When faced with challenges, people had to innovate, had to find new ways to survive and thrive.
Right. We see it in everything from the development of new agricultural methods to new forms of art, architecture, literature. It might not have been the Renaissance, but it was a time of real intellectual and cultural energy.
It's a powerful reminder that even when things seem dark, the human spirit always finds a way to adapt, to create, and to build something new. So as we come to the end of our deep dive into early medieval Europe, I'm left with this feeling of, well, awe and optimism, I guess. Awe at the sheer scale of change, empires rising and falling, ideas shaping the course of history, but also optimism. Humanity found a way to not just survive, but to lay the groundwork for something new.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. This era, it's often called the Dark Ages, but really it's more like a mosaic, a mix of darkness and light.
I love that. It reminds us that history is never simple, never black and white. It's full of contradictions and surprises, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
Exactly. And what we've seen in this deep dive is that those events, as chaotic as they were, they shaped our world. They influenced our political systems, our cultural identities, our religions, even how we think.
So as we say goodbye to this era, I hope our listeners have gained a new appreciation for how complex and interconnected history really is, and just how resilient the human spirit can be.
I hope so too. And remember, this is just the beginning. There's always more to explore.
So keep diving deeper, keep asking those questions, and keep discovering those amazing connections between the past, the present, and the future.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening.